So Annabelle,
Yes.
fun fact, approximately 100 billion people have lived and died since the beginning of human history.
That's a lot of souls, Jim.
That's a lot of something that should be around.
Uh-huh.
And the other thing is, we're the only creature on the planet that contemplates its own demise. We're the only ones who know we die and even think about an afterlife.
Yes, that's weird. I mean, you think about it, you don't see a lot of dogs sitting around a campfire telling ghost stories.
No, they have no idea it's going to happen. Did you ever think about your own death when you...
Well, Jim, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer during COVID, so I do think about it, but there's really good news. I'm still here, and Jim, you'll be happy to hear, I have remained God-free.
Oh, that is such good news.
Wait, what's happening? That was like very ghostly
That's
here.
Kenny, our investigator, our chief investigator.
He's haunting us.
Yeah, Kenny, you're not on until later. Get out of the TV. Go on. Get out. You're on later. Oh, all right. Ghosts in the Afterlife on this episode of Skeptilab. Get your s'mores and popcorn. We're going there. Hello again, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Skeptilab. I'm Jim Underdown, your host, and I'm joined by my friend Annabelle Gurwitch. Thank you for being here.
Jim, it's always a pleasure to see you.
Of course, everybody remembers Annabelle from Dinner and a Movie, been in a million movies, a million TV shows, best-selling author on New York Times, and the Tiny Victories podcast, people. Don't forget about that.
Oh, thank you. I think we got all the plugs in.
That's
Thank
it.
You.
Okay.
Thank you.
That beats paying you. So today we're going to be talking about ghosts in the afterlife.
I love this topic. Oh, it's so vexing.
It is vexing. And I mean, for us atheists, let's be honest, we're not real big on the whole afterlife thing.
No. And I don't really understand. I mean, I know people are really into this idea of like forever and eternity, but like I had trouble getting through Oppenheimer, and that was like 3 hours. Like eternity seems like a long time. And then this is where I go, Jim.
Yeah.
I think about practical things, right? So the question is, who are you going to spend eternity with, right? See, I imagine it's like middle school cafeteria. Right? Like you're trying to be with the cool girls, but they won't let you sit there. And so like you're an eternity by yourself at like the bad table. Or like people are really into this idea that their family is going to be there.
Depends on how well you get along with your family, right?
Has no one been to a family dinner? Like who? Eternity? It is an eternity. And then like the ancestors greeting you. That's a popular myth. But in my case, I know that like my ancestors might not be so happy to see me. They were very religious. They might be like, treif, which means not kosher.
It could be a nightmare. I mean, really, it depends on if you get, and now if you got to choose your own heaven, that might, like I wouldn't, if there's harp music or like Christian rock, forget about it. I don't want it.
Well, what if you were paired with Jerry Falwell? You were roomies.
Oh, well, Falwell, not going to be there.
Oh, that's true.
We're talking about ghosts and the afterlife, but are they even related?
Well, that's the thing. It's like another practical issue. Is it like a chicken and an egg issue? Like, are there ghosts so there's an afterlife, or is there an afterlife so you have ghosts? And then the question for me is always like, what is the threshold for like ghosthood? Right? So
how do you get in?
How do you get in? Like some people have this idea. I've heard this thing about how, well, ghosts are souls. Now we got to believe in a soul too, ghost souls, afterlife, but souls who have unfinished business. Doesn't everyone have unfinished?
I do at this minute. Yeah, I do.
I mean, really though, like then there'd be so many. Like you would go on the beach in Normandy and you would just be knocked over because there'd just be full of ghosts everywhere. I mean, so that's where, and then people want to be with their dogs and cats in the afterlife. So do cats and dogs, are they ghosts or do they have souls? It gets so complicated.
Yeah. A lot of rules, a lot of bureaucracy.
Rules, bureaucracy.
To get through. But really, whether you're a ghost or you're going to heaven,
Right.
not hell so much, but people really want to think that they're going somewhere, right? They don't want this idea that they're going to end at some point. So yeah, there's this desire to believe in the afterlife. And by the way, starting out really, really wanting to believe that something is true is not good for the critical thinking.
Well, then, like, that's part of that's related to, like, the way that you have those shows on TV where they're all the ghost hunters, right? And they have all these gadgets. And I mean, I always think about that because, like, well, what are they doing? Like I had a light bright set when I was a kid, like that, you know, you just things light up. And I mean, it seems like something is happening. So what are these people actually doing, Jim? Like, how do they make bells and whistles go off?
Well, that's an excellent question because all these toys and gadgets they bring are an interesting topic in themselves.
Yes.
So you know the best person to talk to about these gadgets and ghost hunting stuff is?
A ghost?
No.
Bill Murray?
No, Kenny Biddle, the guy who was haunting our TV.
Yes.
Yeah, Kenny is the chief investigator from the Center for Inquiry, and he's got a little bit of history in this area. Here's my conversation with Kenny. From the Skeptilab, thanks for being on, man.
Hey, Jim, it's good to see you again.
Yeah, this is great. So, you know, when we decided to do an episode on ghosts in the afterlife, you were top of the list to come on because I know you're experienced in this world, painful as it might be.
Yes.
Yeah, so let's talk about that for a second. You're now chief investigator with the Center for Inquiry, but you weren't always on this side of the skeptical coin. You actually have some history as a ghost hunter. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I was a ghost hunter in the early 90s, or actually the early 90s going in the mid 90s. I was a ghost hunter. I had just gotten married and I always had an interest. I loved ghosts and monsters and UFOs and all kinds of stories like that. I mean, I grew up on shows like In Search Of, you know, and that was like the core of my belief in everything, those kind of shows. So when I jumped on this new thing that came out called the internet, the World Wide Web, I was amazed at all the information you could find, and I found a local group that went out and hunted ghosts. And I was like, all right, let me join and see what happens. And for a couple of years, I ran around in the dark with a bunch of other people and various little pieces of equipment, and really, like, you know, thought I was capturing ghosts.
I see these guys, a lot of times they're pulling up with a whole van load of equipment, and it looks kind of cool and sciencey, and they set up these, you know, control rooms, and it's like, it kind of feels like a FBI investigation or something. But if you really look at some of what they're bringing out there, maybe it isn't what the average person would think. So let's talk about, pick a few things that you see on a typical ghost hunt. Let's talk about what they actually do and what people think they do.
Some popular gadgets that people use, like the EMF meters, electromagnetic field meters. These are very popular, especially the K2 meter. I have one here. So the K2 meter, and this is a modified one, and I'll explain what I did to it. But basically, I think you pay $50 for this, and you go around, you push the button in. I don't think this one works. No, I have to change the battery. But the lights light up if it comes close to an EM field. And basically, anything electrical will create a field. I mean, the electrical wiring in your house, even if there's current not flowing, you still have an electric current there, electric field, which these can read. They got to get a little closer, but when you turn the power on, when electricity starts flowing, now you create that magnetic field, and these are much more sensitive to it, and it'll pick it up.
Of course, is making the assumption in the first place that ghosts, even if they did exist, are made of electromagnetic fields in the first place, which hasn't really been established either.
Right. There's this idea that spirits or ghosts, they can either affect or create or manipulate electromagnetic fields. I don't know exactly where it came from. I kind of think that it came from Ghostbusters. I honestly think it came from the movie because when you look at the PKE meter that they have, and I have one. I have one. So when you have the PKE meter here, and they were walking around and they're measuring the psychokinetic energy. That's your PKE meter, and they're talking all this jargon. When Dan Aykroyd, who is really good at all this weird jargon, starts spewing out this stuff, it sounded really cool. And since 1984, when it came out, EMF meters started coming onto the market, handheld ones that you can for the consumer. And ghost hunters took it and said, "Hey, you know what? This is reading energy in my home, and let's see if the ghosts, which we think are made of energy, will make this thing light up."
Now, I've heard about these things called ghost boxes. Now, these things, they hear ghosts, or what are they supposed to do?
So ghost box, I'm sorry, man. Like some of this equipment is just so far out there. It just, you feel that every time. It's like, oh,
Hey, I know, believe me, I know.
So they started out as they're broken radios. That's what they are. They're radios that sweep around all the stations, AM and FM, but don't stop. They don't stop on the station that comes in clear. They continue to go through at either a set speed, or the newer models allow you to adjust the speed that it sweeps through. So the original one, I actually have it here. This is the Radio Shack hack. This was a Radio Shack radio. It was a basic AM FM radio. Didn't even have a speaker with it. You just plugged your headphones into it, and you opened it up, and there was a connection on the circuit board that you cut. And when you cut it, it would allow this to keep sweeping through the stations and not stop. So, I mean, I'm going to turn it on. You should be able to hear it. So you can see that it's cycled through the station. You should be able to hear it through the audio, and it's not going to stop. Let's keep going. The idea is to ask questions of the ghosts of like, hey, what's your name? How did you die? What year is it? How many spirits are there in this room? And then you wait. You wait to hear something. And I guarantee you're going to hear something. Why? Because you're listening to radio stations.
People are searching the radio stations. It hits somebody talking every once in a while, and either you seize on that and make something of it, or you pass it up and wait for something that does make sense. Is that fair?
That is exactly what happens.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the state of mind of I'm going to call them ghost hunters, but I think it spills over into people who just believe in ghosts and the afterlife. It seems to me there's some sort of there's a hope mixed into it. There's a maybe an expectation, but a hope built into it, which is not a good critical thinking place to start from.
You're going in there with that bias. You think it's haunted. It's old. It's creepy. It smells old. I mean, it has all the attributes of a haunted house. And I mean, you go in there and everything goes through that filter.
Thank you so much for adding to our episode on ghosts in the afterlife. Keep up all your great work, and thanks for being on Skeptilab.
Awesome, Jim. Anytime you need me, just give me a call. Will
do. All right, thanks, Kenny. Impressed by all those gadgets?
They're very impressive, very impressive. Here's one other issue I think is food for thought,
okay.
Right? So these hauntings and the ghost hunters are always hunting at night.
Yes.
So what are all the ghosts doing during the day? Are they like sitting around playing cards, or just like waiting for sundown? Come on, just like waiting. Oh, God,
they're on break. Yeah.
They're on break.
Punch in at midnight.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just all the questions, Jim.
Yeah. So that's all these ways of detecting energy. That's who knows.
Right. Well, there's also another thing that. Okay, maybe Kenny, and you can answer this for me.
Okay.
So I know I read something about that study, or was it an experiment? The thing about the the soul has weight, right? They did something where they weighed a body before, I don't know, after death, they lost like 28 grams. What was that?
Yeah.
And then there was idea that the soul weighs 28 grams. What's that?
I don't know what the guy was doing on a scale when he died, but yes, supposedly 28 grams just left the body. But this was a very sloppy experiment. We don't even know if it was well measured or anything.
Right.
But it's never been replicated. They only did like 4 or 5 bodies, and then it's never been repeated.
It hasn't passed the scientific method.
So this whole idea of energy leaving the body is not real.
Well, I mean, it just, again, the practical problem of if there is this energy in the body and then it's gone because that's like the spirit or the whatever you want to call it. Okay, if those are actually corporeally felt as energy, well, you would be knocking into it, wouldn't you? Like couldn't walk down the street because how many people have been in
100 billion.
100 billion, that'd be like 100 billion energy fields. Like what is this thing about energy? And people love that term though because it sounds like science. It sounds sciencey. Energy.
Right. Yeah, that's it is a problem. And energy is measurable. Usually most forms of energy are measurable.
So what does happen? I mean, I think I know, but I think there's a scientific answer. What happens to the energy in your body when you die? Does it dissipate? Well, what happens?
Yeah, well, to answer questions like this, I like to go to people who really know what they're talking about, like doctors and scientists.
Or Bill Murray.
Or
Ghost.
Murray, maybe. Dan Aykroyd.
Okay.
But I talked to Dr. Stephen Novella. Oh. Stephen Novella is an associate professor at the Yale Medical School. He's one of the hosts of Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, and he's a neurologist, so he knows all about how the body works and how the brain works. Here's my conversations with Steve talking about some of these energy issues. Steve, welcome to Skeptilab. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me.
So we're talking about ghosts and the afterlife and all that stuff. I thought I would get a scientific perspective, and I thought I would get a medical perspective, and you, of course, are the perfect person to talk to about this. So, I mean, why don't we just start with, I didn't even know how science or medicine defines death, but let's talk about what death is in a human body and a human brain.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few levels actually of death. We could talk about the legal definition, which does vary from state to state, but essentially, medically, we recognize that someone is dead when either their heart stops, they're not breathing, or when there's no evidence of any brain function. That's technically brain death, which is legally dead. So there's two sort of legal definitions of death. Your body's dead or your brain is dead. Biologically, there's also what we call cellular death. So even after your body dies, the cells in your body are still alive for a while, depending on the tissue. The brain cells start to die actually in a few minutes. They don't survive very long without a steady stream of oxygen and glucose. Your muscles, may survive for several hours on the other end of the spectrum. But, after a number of hours, then not only is your whole body dead and your brain dead, but all the cells in your body are also dead.
So a lot of the ghost believers seem to think that there's this ball of energy that is somehow inside of us. And then when we die, that goes somewhere else, and maybe that becomes a ghost, or it goes to heaven, or is it the soul, or whatever. Is there any scientific basis to this ball of energy having its own separate existence?
So, I mean, the short answer is no. There's no scientific evidence for it. It doesn't even make minimal scientific sense. For each component of that claim, you could think about it in a number of different ways. There isn't any scientific evidence for it. I mean, the big question is, is human consciousness. Where does human consciousness come from? And we now have 150, 200 years of neuroscience, especially in the last 50 years or so, that are multiple independent lines of evidence, all pointing very strongly to the fact that human consciousness is what the brain does, right? It's an active phenomenon produced by brain activity. Our consciousness is our brain activity. When the brain's not active, we're not conscious. You destroy the brain, you destroy yourself. You destroy all your memories, your feelings, everything that you are, everything that you know. It's all just the brain. And absent the brain, there is no consciousness, there is no awareness, there is no self, there are no memories. There isn't this completely independent, energy that also is all of your memories and all of your conscious, your personality and everything. From a physics point of view, it doesn't really make sense either. It's energy can't just exist on its own, and without, the way I like to put it, or some physicists put it, is if you were just pure energy, you would by definition have to be traveling at the speed of light, right? So you can't have like a ball of energy just sitting there by definition. It's got to be produced by something or connected to something or whatever. But of course, the way out of that is to say, well, this is spiritual energy. It doesn't follow the rules of physics as we know them. It's something completely different. So, all right, so you're hypothesizing something that we have no independent scientific knowledge of, that doesn't follow any of the laws of physics as we know them, and for which there is no independent evidence. Which is the equivalent of saying it's magic and just leaving it at that. So, is there scientific evidence for any of that? No, not a bit.
You probably didn't cover this in medical school, but you've probably heard this idea that as soon as a person dies, the instant he or she dies, they lose 21 grams of weight.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard that a long time ago. Read the research. It's based on really, really a very old study, and it's just never been replicated. It's just like a pre-scientific almost, kind of thing. The equipment that they had at the time, the 21 grams was very tiny weight compared to the noise in the system that anything could have produced. That kind of background noise. So they were pulling out this tiny, tiny signal, and it was just wishful thinking, just bad research technique. This is not replicatable. This is not a real phenomenon.
Aside from that, you would think that there would be some scientific consensus if ghosts, spirits, the afterlife really did exist. Wouldn't it be detectable somehow? Wouldn't we come to a conclusion?
Yeah, so I agree. I like the fact that the ghost hunters try to have it both ways, right? So they say, well, you can see ghosts. They create cold. They might create a feeling like if they pass through you. You can photograph them, but whenever the evidence is negative, it's like, well, that's because they're spiritual. Like, well, which is it? Because if they are affecting film, and now apparently CCDs, in digital cameras, because they could affect both, right? Then something's got to be happening, right? The photons are bouncing off of them, or they're emitting photons, and it's having a chemical reaction on that photographic plate, or it is having an electrical reaction on that CCD of that digital camera. There's got to be something physical happening. So what is that physical phenomenon connecting to? What is causing it? It's got to be following the laws of physics somehow.
The thing is, people really think, Jim, that they have the experience of seeing ghosts. Now, I never saw a ghost or thought I did. I was sure as a kid we did the Ouija board. That's more the energy thing. But I know people who seem like normal people who I maybe respect and think are intelligent, and then when they all tell me that they have had conversations with ghosts, I'm like, well, what is it a form of mental illness? What they're so convinced. What is that?
Yeah, it's usually not mental illness.
Uh-huh.
Most people have some kind of experience like this, over the course of their lives. And it turns out, yeah, there's a lot of good, normal reasons that people have these experiences. They're not lying, they're not making it up, they're not on drugs, they're not sick. They just have these experiences. And actually, Steve addresses some of these things. So, Steve, what about why people have these experiences?
So we know that our brains are glitchy, right? I think that's just a good way to put it. That's a good premise to start with. Our brains are glitchy. We all sleep every night, and we go through a sort of a different type of consciousness when we're asleep. When we're falling asleep or when we're sleep deprived, we know that our ability to perceive and process information is compromised. We may hallucinate or not perceive things accurately. The same happens when we're under the influence of drugs, or we're under the influence of too little oxygen, or extreme stress. And so at some point in our lives we all experience this, where we have these kind of stressed situations. Some people have neurological diseases where they have a tendency to hallucinate or to misperceive things or misremember things. And so on the background of the fact that our brains are glitchy, we experience a lot of weird stuff, but they could all be understood as brain glitches. Again, probably one of the most famous now is hypnagogic hallucinations or hypnopompic hallucinations. So, which I've personally experienced. I can know how powerful they can be. When you're either falling asleep or waking up, sometimes your brain gets this, the simplistic way to put it, this is just sort of an analogy, but your brain kind of gets stuck between the awake and the dreaming phase. And so you're sort of dreaming while you're sort of awake. And you have this experience while your body is still paralyzed, because our bodies are paralyzed when we're dreaming. So you don't sleepwalk every night when you're dreaming, right? So you're kind of stuck in the paralyzed phase. You sort of wake up in your bed, but you're paralyzed. It's very scary. You're sort of hallucinating. You may feel like there's a presence there. You may feel like there's a pressure on your chest. And it's a very profound experience, because it's this otherworldly experience, because your brain is in a different state of consciousness, the one that you're not used to. So we know that 100% that is a neurological phenomenon. And yet every culture interprets that experience in line with their cultural beliefs, which for most cultures is some kind of ghost-like spiritual demonic encounter or experience. In modern Western cultures, it's also been interpreted as an alien encounter, being abducted, But it's the same experience. It's just interpreted in line with culture. So I think that's a good microcosm of, I think, the entire thing. Is that there's sometimes we see things out of the corner of our eye that are not there, or we may get an eerie feeling. We may have a sense of presence. We may hear something that is just an echo in our memory or in our mind. We may experience weird things when we're falling asleep. We misperceive things in the shadows. And if you are a critical thinker, or you understand the glitchiness of the human brain, you're like, yep, that's my brain glitching. That's not a big deal. But for most people who have ever lived, you don't understand that. You're like, what was that? And then you basically explain it in line with whatever your cultural beliefs are. That was some kind of ghost or demon or alien or whatever it was doing that. And so that's what all of this is. And that can explain basically everything that gets interpreted as ghost. It's just the background noise of our neurological existence being filtered through our cultural beliefs. That's it.
Well, this has been great. Dr. Steve Novella, thanks for weighing in on ghosts in the afterlife. Thanks a lot, Steve.
All right. Good seeing you, Jim. Thanks a lot.
I had one of these waking dream experiences.
You did?
A hand grabbed my calf.
A calf. You had a cow in your...
No, my calf, my leg. Something grabbed my leg while I was sleeping. I jumped up. Doors were locked, windows were locked, no one else in the room, no one under the bed. I checked everything because it felt that real, but there was nothing. And it took me, I learned later that it was a waking dream. I was half asleep, but man, it felt real. I really did.
I had a haunting experience.
Oh, really?
Yes. I have been haunted by decisions I've made in the past. Yes,
Yeah,
I think a lot
welcome.
of people can relate to that. But no, actually, I spent the night in James Thurber's house in Ohio. Now, James Thurber, amongst his short stories, he wrote about how there were ghosts in his house. And so some people won't spend the night there. They invite you there when you're a Thurber Prize finalist and all. And it's like a whole lore about the ghosts in James Thurber's house. And I am happy to say I did not see a ghost, although I did break his bathtub.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Don't invite me to stay at your house. It can be a problem.
Okay, let's review.
Yes.
The gadgets are
Cat
not what they
toys.
are.
Yes.
What they're doing. Okay. The videos that we see cannot be trusted.
Right. Energy.
Energy, I think we can throw that out the window.
Okay. Afterlife. Too crowded. Not possible.
Too crowded, too many rules.
The movie Annabelle about the haunted doll. Not about me.
Not this Annabelle.
Yes.
People have the experiences, but they're brain glitches and misperceptions of reality. We see this all the time. And then finally, the second you die, you start rotting from the inside out. So, good night, everybody. Thanks for being at Skeptilab. And
We can't end like that,
No?
Jim. No.
okay, Annabelle, well, how do you want to end the show then?
Well, we have to do something haunting, like ghostly, like
Whoa, how'd you do that? Where'd you go?
Jim, I'm a ghost.
Oh, wow. Well, I don't believe it, but thanks again to our guests this episode, Steve Novella, Kenny Biddle, and the great Annabelle Gurwitch, wherever she is. Hey, I think I want to try this. What do I do? Just click? What? Like this maybe? So, do you think you could prove paranormal ability under scientific test conditions? Take a shot at our $500,000. Go to CFIIG.org. And by the way, hit the like button below. Don't forget to subscribe to the CFI YouTube channel for more interesting content.